The crowd waited for music, but chaos walked on stage instead. A packed high school auditorium froze as the music teacher suddenly collapsed moments before the show. Panic spread. Students trembled. The performance was seconds from being canceled. Then Keanu Reeves stepped forward, lifted a dusty bass, and did something no one expected. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, tucked between a stack of foundation paperwork and a script revision Keanu had been meaning to read. His assistant placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, mentioning it looked handwritten. Keanu noticed the slightly uneven cursive on the front. It wasn't from a studio. It wasn't from an agent. It wasn't from anyone wanting something from him. That already made it unusual. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter written on inexpensive school stationery, the kind decorated with faded treble clefs and smudged ink. The message came from a man named Harold Benton, a music teacher at Santa Clarita Ridgewood High School. He wrote with a kind of earnestness that felt rare. He explained that the school was hosting its annual year-end concert, a small tradition meant to showcase the orchestra program and raise funds for new instruments. He mentioned that many students were from working-class families, some struggling, some dealing with personal battles far beyond their age. For many of them, music wasn't just an elective, it was the thing that kept them grounded. Mr. Benton explained how Keanu's foundation had quietly supported their modest scholarship program for 2 years. He wrote that he didn't expect anything, but he hoped if Keanu's schedule allowed, that he might attend as a guest presenter. He said the students didn't need a celebrity moment. They just needed a reminder that what they were doing mattered to someone beyond the walls of their school. Keanu read the letter twice. There was a sincerity in Mr. Benton's words, something that reminded him of the teachers who had lifted him when he was young. He remembered the hours he spent leaning into his bass, learning its weight, learning its patience. Music had steadied him in ways no one else ever understood. As he stood at the counter with the letter in hand, he felt that old connection rise again. He didn't need to think long. He told his assistant he would go. He didn't want a press release, no announcements, no photographers. This wasn't a headline moment. It felt like something closer to home, something that shouldn't be covered in flashing lights. His assistant nodded and adjusted the calendar quietly. It would be simple. Just a visit. Just a chance to support kids who cared about music. On the day of the concert, Keanu pulled into the school parking lot in his old SUV, arriving earlier than expected. The campus looked modest, peeling paint, cracked asphalt. A group of students carried music stands across the walkway, trying not to drop anything. A janitor leaned against the wall, taking a short break, nodding at Keanu without making a scene. No one rushed. No one swarmed. This place felt grounded. The auditorium buzzed with small bursts of nervous laughter as people prepared for the show. Banners were taped unevenly across the walls. The chairs wobbled slightly on the worn wooden floor. It wasn't glamorous, but every detail spoke of people doing their best with what they had. It carried the quiet heartbeat of a community trying to give its kids something to be proud of. Inside the backstage hallway, a whisper spread quickly. One of the cello players lifted her head, eyes widening when she saw him. She mouthed the words, "That's really him," then clutched her bow a little tighter. Keanu offered a gentle smile to the cello player, hoping to ease the nervousness written across her face. She wasn't the only one staring. The moment word spread backstage, heads began to peek out from behind curtains, music stands, and instrument cases. Some students whispered in excitement. Others froze, completely afraid to even breathe too loudly. But there was something innocent in their reactions, something pure. These weren't people expecting a movie star to walk in. They were kids who couldn't believe someone they admired cared enough to show up at their small school auditorium. Mr. Harold Benton emerged from the side office with a clipboard and a stack of sheet music. He was in his late 50s, with warm eyes and a gentle posture that suggested years of patience. When he saw Keanu, he nearly dropped the papers in surprise. He hurried forward and shook Keanu's hand with both of his, a gesture full of gratitude and exhaustion. He apologized for the chaotic environment and explained that the school had been dealing with budget cuts, instrument repairs, and a tight show deadline. But even in those rushed explanations, his pride for the students shone through every word. Keanu reassured him that everything looked wonderful. He meant it. There was something quietly heroic about teachers like Benton doing their best with limited time, limited resources, and unlimited expectations. As he followed the teacher backstage, he noticed small details that said more than any introduction could. Tape on violin bows, trumpet cases held together with stickers, a stack of spare strings labeled donations, drawings on the wall made by younger band students showing smiling musicians on a big stage. Mr. Benton introduced Keanu to the orchestra members one section at a time. Shy nods, nervous laughter, a few stunned stares. The violins sat in a cluster near the center, tuning with careful, practiced movements. The percussion kids whispered jokes behind their music stands, but they kept glancing over to make sure Keanu was real. He walked slowly among them, complimenting the shine on a saxophone, the courage it took to perform the effort that went into each rehearsal. The students responded with small bursts of confidence. A violinist straightened her shoulders. A trumpet player stopped fidgeting. A young percussionist lifted his chin slightly as if trying to match the posture of someone he admired. Keanu didn't have to do anything extravagant. Just being there, speaking gently, made the room steadier. When the assistant principal rushed in calling for places, the orchestra scrambled into position. Keanu stepped aside, watching them with quiet admiration. They moved with the energy of kids who had worked hard for months with no guarantees of perfection. He recognized that kind of courage. It was the same courage he once needed when he first stepped onto a stage holding a bass that felt too heavy for his hands. Even before the concert began, Keanu sensed that tonight would matter to these kids. Maybe more than they knew. Maybe more than he knew. There was a tremble in the air, a fragile kind of anticipation that made him straighten slightly and take a slow breath. As the students moved toward the stage entrance, Keanu followed Mr. Benton toward a quiet corner near the side curtain. The teacher placed his clipboard on a chair and let out a slow breath. Up close, Keanu noticed the tired lines under his eyes, the kind that came from years of giving more than he received. Benton admitted that this group had been rehearsing late into the evenings, trying to make the performance special for families who rarely had moments of celebration. Many of the parents worked long hours. Some had never heard their children play a full concert before. Keanu listened with full attention. He understood what it meant when a moment carried more weight than the world realized. For these kids, tonight wasn't just another school event. It was something they had pinned their hopes on. A chance to feel seen. A chance to make their loved ones proud. A chance to prove that music mattered even in a world where it often struggled to survive beneath budgets and obligations. Through the gap in the curtain, Keanu could see families arriving. A father tightened the tie on his son's borrowed dress shirt. A mother set aside her phone to adjust her daughter's hair. Younger siblings swung their legs impatiently on metal chairs that scraped softly across the floor. Despite the imperfections, the auditorium was filling with warmth. The room buzzed not with glamour, but with a kind of simple, heartfelt anticipation he rarely witnessed anywhere else. Mr. Benton thanked Keanu again for coming. He tried to explain how much it meant to the students. He talked about one who walked an hour to school each day because the bus schedule didn't match her rehearsal times. Another practiced in the cafeteria after hours because home was too noisy. Another saved lunch money for months to rent a secondhand clarinet. The stories painted a picture of determination stronger than any stage lighting could ever highlight. As the principal signaled for pre-show checks, Benton hurried toward the wings to help a student fix a misplaced shoulder rest. Keanu leaned against the wall and watched the orchestra gather in their semicircle, heartbeats rising with every passing second. The students scanned the audience for familiar faces. Some smiled when they found them. Others lowered their eyes when they didn't. A few of the kids stole glances at Keanu again, but this time their expressions were different. Less disbelief, more reassurance. He offered them a small nod that told them they belonged here, that the stage was theirs tonight no matter what happened. The lights dimmed slightly as the opening announcement approached. The air tightened, humming with the weight of expectation. Keanu straightened, sensing that the ordinary invitation he had received weeks earlier was about to unfold into something far more meaningful than he ever anticipated. Backstage was a maze of dim lights, tangled extension cords, and scattered sheet music. The air carried the soft scent of rosin and the sharp tang of metal chairs scraping the floor. As Keanu stepped deeper into the room, the orchestra students shifted nervously, unsure how close they were allowed to stand to him. Some stared at the ground, others looked at him with wide, unsure eyes. Their excitement mixed with nerves in a way that made the room feel warm, fragile, and full of quiet hope. Benton returned from helping a student adjust a chin rest and tried to speak with enthusiasm, but his voice carried a faint tremble. Still, he smiled and gently guided Keanu toward the various groups of young musicians. The teacher introduced them not as performers, but as kids he clearly cared for. There was pride in his tone, mixed with exhaustion he tried to hide. Keanu sensed it but didn't push. He followed Benton's lead, listening closely to each introduction. The first student Benton brought forward was Maya, a soft-spoken violinist, no older than 15. Her violin case had visible cracks covered by layers of stickers and clear tape. Her bow had a patch wrapped near the frog, holding it together just enough to play. She avoided eye contact, at first staring down at her shoes as if afraid her voice might shake if she spoke. When Benton gently encouraged her to greet Keanu, she lifted her eyes for only a moment. In that quick glance, Keanu saw her anxiety but also a spark of deep passion she didn't know how to express. Maya admitted almost in a whisper that her parents didn't know she played in the orchestra. They thought she stayed late at school for tutoring. She said orchestra rehearsals were the only time her heart stopped racing long enough to breathe. She held the violin close to her chest like a shield. Keanu offered her a small, steady smile, telling her he understood what it was like to find safety in music when the world felt overwhelming. The relief in her eyes was subtle, but real. Next was Carlos, a tall, thin saxophonist whose instrument had dents along the bell and scratches from years of use. His father, he explained, worked 2 jobs and couldn't make it to the show tonight. Carlos said it without bitterness, simply stating it as fact. Still, Keanu noticed the small disappointment behind his practiced expression. Carlos brightened a little when he talked about how he practiced in the garage at night so he wouldn't wake anyone. Sometimes the neighbors complained, but most nights he played anyway because the music helped him forget how tired everyone at home always seemed. Erin, the cellist, waited near the corner with her instrument resting on her knees. She was pale, with gentle eyes and soft movements that suggested she was preserving her energy carefully. Her cello had a thin crack near the base that someone had filled with wood glue. She told Keanu she dealt with chronic pain, but music helped her feel like her body wasn't the only thing that defined her. Keanu crouched slightly so he could meet Erin's eyes at her level. She seemed surprised that someone like him would pay full attention to her, but she didn't look away. She explained that rehearsals sometimes exhausted her, but she always pushed through because the cello felt like the only place where she wasn't fighting something inside her body. She told him she practiced lying down on days when sitting up hurt too much. Her voice stayed steady, but there was an honesty in her tone that made her words heavier than she intended. Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. He didn't offer pity. He offered respect, the kind that made Erin straighten her posture just a little. He told her that pain doesn't erase talent, and that music often grows deeper when life feels difficult. She held the edge of her cello tighter, as if his words had settled inside her like a quiet pulse. Then Dante approached from the back of the room, carrying 2 drumsticks tucked into his pocket and a small practice pad under his arm. He was older than the others, with a restless energy and a posture that suggested he wasn't used to being comfortable around adults. His shoes were worn and his jacket had frayed sleeves, but his eyes held a fire that set him apart from the softer expressions of the younger musicians. Mr. Benton introduced Dante with a proud but tired smile. He explained that Dante had struggled during his first years of high school. Detention, fights, almost being expelled. It seemed like trouble followed him everywhere until he wandered into the music room one afternoon to escape another potential suspension. The drum set in the corner caught his attention, and Mr. Benton told him to try it. From that day on, Dante showed up early and stayed late. The rhythm steadied him in ways nothing else had. Dante shrugged, trying to appear unaffected by Benton's praise, but Keanu noticed the way his foot tapped softly against the floor. It wasn't impatience. It was a beat he couldn't turn off. Keanu told him he admired anyone who could channel anger into art. Dante didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed slightly as if someone finally understood him without needing a full explanation. As Keanu continued walking through the room, he saw more signs of struggle hidden beneath the excitement. Instrument cases patched with duct tape. Rosen shared between 5 violinists, a flute held together by a rubber band. Even so, the students handled their instruments with the kind of care musicians reserve for things that have saved them. Keanu felt something settle in his chest. These weren't kids going through motions. They were trying to hold on to something bigger than themselves. Their faces carried the weight of families, responsibilities, fears, and dreams, all competing for space. Yet here they were, about to walk onto a stage and play music for a room full of people who might never understand what it took for them to get there. Behind them, Mr. Benton wiped his forehead. He tried to hide the gesture, but Keanu noticed the paleness creeping into his cheeks. The teacher brushed it off quickly, claiming he had rushed through lunch and hadn't eaten much. No one paid attention. Everyone assumed he was just nervous for the show. Keanu kept watching him, sensing something wasn't right. Keanu moved through the final cluster of students, noticing how each one carried a different kind of pressure. Some whispered reminders to themselves about difficult passages. Others clutched their sheet music as if afraid it might disappear. The room felt like a fragile ecosystem held together by hope, fear, and the steady hum of preparation. Despite everything they lacked, they were determined to perform. Near the backstage door, Keanu saw a girl polishing her trumpet so intensely that her hands shook. She wasn't part of Mr. Benton's introductions, but she looked up when she sensed him watching. Her eyes were wide, nervous, but bright. She whispered that she didn't want her mother to see her mess up. Keanu told her that courage wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up even when you're scared. She nodded, quickly swallowing whatever fear had been stuck in her throat. Across the room, Maya tightened her violin bow with careful fingers. Carlos checked his reed twice. Erin breathed slowly, saving her strength. Dante tapped a rhythm against his thigh, eyes distant but focused. Keanu realized he could read their emotions by the way they held their instruments. Every grip, every breath, every small adjustment carried a story. Mr. Benton tried to rally the group, but his voice wavered again. He leaned one hand against a table as if steadying himself. The students didn't notice. They were too wrapped in their own nerves. But Keanu saw the way Benton blinked a little too slowly, the way his shoulders sagged for a moment before he caught himself. The teacher brushed it off with a tired smile and told everyone to gather near the wings. The show was minutes away. Keanu followed behind the students as they formed a line, unaware that the night ahead would take a turn none of them expected. The orchestra lined up quietly near the wings of the stage. The buzz of the audience seeped through the curtains like a steady vibration. Dozens of parents filled the auditorium, adjusting their phones for recording whispering reminders to younger siblings and searching for their children in the clustered shadows behind the curtain. The air felt charged, ready to burst into music. The students held their instruments with trembling hands, each breath drawn carefully as they tried to steady themselves. The assistant principal hurried past, double-checking microphones and lighting cues. She whispered that the principal would begin the evening with a short welcome, followed by a few words from Keanu later in the program. Keanu nodded politely, though he had never planned to say much. His goal was simply to support the students, not pull the spotlight toward himself. Mr. Benton stepped forward to give the orchestra a final round of encouragement. His hands shook slightly as he checked that Maya had extra rosin, that Carlos had his reed properly set, that Erin had positioned her end pin securely, and that Dante's sticks were balanced. His devotion to them was unmistakable. He cared about every detail because he cared about every child standing in that line. He began to speak, his voice soft but warm. He told them this night belonged to them, that no matter how imperfect the world outside felt tonight, they would remind themselves why music existed in the first place. The kids leaned closer, hanging on every word, needing to hear it from the man who had guided them through every rough rehearsal and each fragile breakthrough. Then, mid-sentence, he stopped. His breath hitched, his face drained of color. Before anyone could react, Mr. Benton swayed forward, clutching his head. His clipboard slid from his hand and clattered onto the floor. A violin bow snapped under someone's shoe as the students scrambled back. The sound of it breaking was sharp and jarring, cutting through the whispers and the first flickers of panic. Maya gasped and dropped her violin against her chest. Erin froze completely, her knuckles whitening against the fingerboard of her cello. Dante took a step back, eyes widening as though time had suddenly slowed. Then, Mr. Benton collapsed. A horrified silence filled the backstage area as he crumpled to the ground. The assistant principal screamed for the stagehand to call 911. Keanu rushed forward, kneeling beside Mr. Benton. He placed 2 fingers along the side of the teacher's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but faint. Benton's breathing came in shallow pulls. The students stood in a jagged arc around them, too scared to move any closer, yet unable to look away. Someone whispered, asking if he was dying. Another student began to cry quietly, the sound barely more than a broken breath. Within moments, paramedics burst through the side door. They knelt beside Keanu, asking for details while quickly assessing Benton's condition. One of them stated that his blood sugar had dropped dangerously low. Hypoglycemia, severe, likely caused by exhaustion and missed meals. The explanation did nothing to calm the students. Their teacher had fallen right before the curtain was about to rise, and now everything felt uncertain. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting Mr. Benton onto a stretcher while checking his vitals and preparing an IV. The fluorescent backstage lights made his face look even paler, the shadows under his eyes deeper, his exhaustion undeniable, now that he could no longer hide it. The students watched helplessly, some holding their breath, others burying their faces against their sleeves. They had never seen their teacher vulnerable. To them, he had always been the anchor in the room, the one who knew how to calm any panic and fix any mistake. Carlos stepped forward as if trying to say something, but his voice got lost somewhere in his throat. Erin reached out and grabbed his sleeve, pulling him back gently. She looked like she might collapse herself if she tried to speak. Maya clutched her violin so tightly that her fingertips turned white. Her lips trembled as she whispered that this couldn't be happening, that Mr. Benton always told them he would stand with them no matter what. Dante clenched his fists, jaw tight, the muscles in his arms twitching with a frustration he didn't know where to direct. He wasn't used to watching people he cared about fall apart in front of him. It stirred something inside him that he had spent years trying to control. The assistant principal followed the paramedics out into the hall, but the principal remained backstage. He looked from the panicked students to the orchestra's empty conductor stand. His worry grew sharper with every passing second. The sound of restless parents in the auditorium drifted through the curtain like a reminder that time was running out. The show was supposed to begin any minute. Instead, they were standing in a silent storm. He took a deep breath, then approached the group, trying to steady his voice. He told the students that it might be best to delay the performance, maybe even cancel it altogether. His tone wasn't harsh. It was protective. He feared the students were too shaken, too heartbroken to continue without guidance. He worried they would crumble under the pressure on stage. The suggestion hit them like a second blow. Their eyes widened, their shoulders slumped. The idea of canceling felt like a betrayal of everything they had practiced for. One student burst into tears. The sound cracked through the tension like a fragile branch snapping under weight. Another student sat down on the floor, holding her clarinet and rocking slowly, trying to keep herself together. Everyone looked lost. Maya stepped closer to Keanu, her voice barely a whisper. She said they couldn't perform without Mr. Benton. They needed him. He had always been the one to guide them through their fears. Without him, the music felt impossible. Keanu looked around at the students, each one holding onto their instruments, as if they might slip from their fingers. He saw their trembling hands, their tear-filled eyes, the dreams they had carried into this night, now hanging by a thread. He didn't speak yet. He just stood there, thinking, the weight of the moment tightening around him. A decision began forming quietly inside him. The backstage curtain fluttered slightly as someone from the lighting crew peeked in, trying to understand why the show hadn't started. The low rumble of the waiting audience kept rising, families shifting in their seats, unaware of the crisis unfolding just a few feet away. The orchestra students stood motionless, trapped between heartbreak and fear, their instruments hanging at their sides like questions with no answers. Keanu took a slow breath and stepped toward the center of the group. His presence alone made the room quiet, even though he hadn't said a word. Maya watched him with red eyes, still trembling. Carlos wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, trying not to let anyone see. Erin hugged her cello, grounding herself in the familiar weight of the wood. Dante ran a hand over his forehead, pacing once, before stopping in front of Keanu as if waiting for instructions. The principal approached, his voice strained, as he said the parents could be informed politely that the performance would be postponed. He suggested rescheduling the event when Mr. Benton was healthy again, or even replacing the student performance with something safer for the evening. The words hung heavy in the air. Every student reacted the same way. Their shoulders fell, their eyes dimmed. It felt like giving up. Keanu turned his gaze toward the stage. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, he could see families leaning forward, expecting a night of music their children had worked so hard for. He knew disappointment. He knew what it felt like to lose a moment you believed in. These kids didn't deserve that heartbreak tonight, not after everything they had carried into this room. He turned back to the students. The desperation in their faces told him exactly what they wanted, but were too afraid to say. They didn't want to cancel. They didn't want to walk away. They just didn't know how to move forward without the man who had taught them how to believe in themselves. Keanu let the silence linger a moment longer. Then he looked at their instruments, at the trembling musicians holding on to hope, and he felt the decision inside him settle firmly into place. He knew what he had to do. The principal pulled Keanu aside, lowering his voice so the students wouldn't hear the trembling edge in it. He explained that the audience was beginning to grow restless. Parents were checking their watches. Younger siblings were kicking the backs of chairs. The murmurs were getting louder. If someone didn't walk on stage soon, the room might slide into confusion. The principal asked Keanu if he would be willing to speak to the crowd, reassure them, maybe tell a short story to buy the school a little time. Keanu looked toward the curtain. The orchestra pit lights glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the floor. The sound of waiting parents pressed against the silence backstage, a steady reminder that time was moving faster than they wanted. The principal repeated that he needed Keanu to talk to calm everyone down. But Keanu didn't nod. He didn't step toward the stage entrance. He turned instead to the students. They stood frozen in a tight circle, gripping their instruments as if they were the only solid things in the world. Maya's hands trembled around her violin. Erin's breath came in shallow pulls. Carlos looked toward the floor, his reed pressed tightly between his fingers. Dante stood rigid, staring at the empty conductor's stand like it was a wound that couldn't be closed. Keanu breathed in slowly, then met the principal's eyes. He spoke quietly, almost gently. "No need to talk. Let them play. I'll join in." The principal blinked in confusion. The students lifted their heads in startled disbelief. For a moment, the idea seemed too impossible to process. The orchestra had never performed without Mr. Benton. They had never played without a conductor. And the thought of Keanu actually joining them seemed like something out of a story too bold to be true. But Keanu had already turned away. He walked toward the far corner of the stage, past a stack of old platforms and a box of forgotten props. There, leaning against the wall where dust had settled in soft gray layers, stood the school's spare bass. The strings were tarnished, the bridge slightly warped, and one tuning peg looked stubbornly stiff, but the instrument stood tall, waiting for someone to claim it. Keanu reached out and lifted it with the familiarity of someone who had held a bass for years. He checked the neck, pressed the strings, and plucked a low note that vibrated softly through the backstage walls. It wasn't perfect. The tone was rough around the edges, but it was enough. He began tuning by ear, adjusting the pegs carefully until the vibrations steadied and the sound settled into something warm, deep, and grounded. The students watched in stunned silence. Keanu finished tuning and looked up at them. Play as if the music is holding you. The room grew still. No one spoke. The students exchanged hesitant glances, trying to understand if this moment was real. Then slowly, like petals opening after a long storm, they moved toward the stage. The students stepped forward reluctantly, every movement careful and uncertain, as if they feared the moment might collapse if they moved too quickly. Maya clutched her violin to her chest, her breaths uneven. She had never played without Mr. Benton standing a few feet away, guiding her with soft nods and steady hands. The idea of walking on stage without him felt impossible, but the alternative felt worse. Canceling meant admitting defeat. She wiped the last of her tears with the back of her sleeve and forced her legs to move. Carlos followed behind her, adjusting his reed with hands that still trembled. He whispered to himself, rehearsing the opening note in his mind, hoping he wouldn't crack under pressure. He had dreamed of playing on this stage for years, and now the fear of letting everyone down tightened in his chest. When he glanced at Keanu tuning the bass, something steadied in him. If someone like that was willing to stand with them, maybe they weren't as alone as they felt. Erin walked carefully, guarding her energy. Every performance cost her something physical, but tonight the emotional weight felt heavier than the instrument resting against her shoulder. She paused near the curtain, closing her eyes for a moment, grounding herself. When she opened them again, she looked at Keanu. He gave her a small, reassuring nod, the kind that said she had already proven her strength long before stepping on stage. She inhaled slowly and followed the others. Dante was the last to move. He stood gripping his drumstick so tightly that his knuckles whitened. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, the rhythm uneven and anxious. He wasn't afraid of performing. He was afraid of breaking. He had never imagined playing without the teacher who had shown him how to turn anger into something beautiful. But he also understood something the others didn't. When the world pushed you into chaos, sometimes the only answer was to push back with everything you had. He lifted his chin and walked forward. Keanu stepped behind them, holding the bass firmly. He didn't try to take charge. He didn't tell them what to expect. He simply stood with them, calm and present, letting his composure wrap around their fear like a quiet anchor. The principal watched all of it with wide eyes, unsure whether to stop them or allow the impossible to unfold. But as the students formed their semicircle just behind the curtain, he saw something in their posture that made him step back. Determination. Fragile, yes, but real. The assistant principal signaled the lighting crew. The audience noise settled into silence. Keanu took his place at the back of the group, fingers resting lightly on the strings of the bass. The curtain began to rise. The moment felt suspended, fragile, waiting for its first breath. As the curtain lifted, a soft glow washed over the stage, illuminating the rows of metal chairs and music stands waiting beneath the lights. The audience hushed instantly. Parents leaned forward. Camera phones rose. Younger siblings quieted, sensing that something important was happening. They expected to see Mr. Benton step out, first baton in hand, offering his warm smile before guiding the orchestra into their first piece. But instead, the stage remained still for a moment. A heartbeat later, the students stepped out. Their entry was hesitant at first. Maya took her place in the front row of violins, her bow trembling as she positioned it carefully. Carlos adjusted his saxophone strap, swallowing hard before lifting the instrument into place. Erin sat in the center-left seat, reserved for the cello section, planting her end pin firmly into the stage floor and meeting the audience with quiet determination. Dante took his seat behind the percussion setup, tapping his sticks together, once drawing a subtle breath to center himself. And then the audience saw him. Keanu Reeves walked in last, carrying the old school bass. His posture was relaxed, not showy, not dramatic, simply steady. The kind of steady that softened the edges of a frightening night. A wave of surprised whispers fluttered across the room, spreading from row to row, like a ripple through still water. Keanu positioned himself behind the students grounding the semicircle. He didn't look at the audience. He looked at the kids, each one of them, one by one. A silent message passed between them, something gentle, but strong enough to draw their shoulders back and lift their chins. The principal stood off stage, frozen in place. He had prepared to speak to the crowd, to explain the emergency, to calm the parents, who would surely worry. But as he watched the students ready themselves, he knew the moment didn't belong to him. The story unfolding on the stage was not one his words could compete with. Maya wiped her eyes once more, trying to blink away the last of her tears. Carlos steadied his breath. Erin rested her hand lightly on the cello's neck. Dante tightened his grip on the drumsticks, finally feeling the rhythm settle inside him. Keanu shifted his weight, tested a single low note with his thumb, and let it hum quietly through the air. The lights dimmed. The audience felt completely silent. No one moved. No one whispered. The auditorium became a still, breathless space. A space waiting for the first note that would decide everything. The conductor's stand sat empty, a silent reminder of the man who should have been there. The spotlight brushed against its wooden frame, casting a thin shadow that stretched across the stage, like a fractured line between what the students expected and what reality had delivered. The audience noticed the absence immediately. Parents tilted their heads. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered questions rippled through the first few rows. The students felt the emptiness more deeply. Their eyes drifted toward the stand, as if they still expected Mr. Benton to materialize beside it, baton raised ready to lead them with the calm confidence they had depended on. But the space remained still. No movement, no reassuring presence. Just the unspoken weight of everything that had happened in the last few minutes. Maya's breath shook as she lifted her violin. Her bow hovered above the strings, suspended in a tremble she couldn't control. Erin gripped her cello lightly, grounding herself in its familiar shape. Carlos wiped his palms against the side of his pants, trying to steady the moisture on his fingers. Dante rolled his shoulders, once a subtle attempt to push away the tension building inside him. Keanu stood behind them, tall and steady, the school's old bass resting against his hip. He met Maya's eyes first. She blinked back her fear, her chest rising in small, quick breaths. He gave her one gentle nod, a nod that said she wasn't alone. A nod that said she didn't need perfection. She just needed to begin. Maya lowered her bow into position. The stage lights softened, tinting the air with a quiet glow. The audience held still, instinctively sensing the fragile moment unfolding before them. Then Keanu plucked the first note. A deep, resonant hum broke the silence, vibrating through the floorboards and drifting into the air like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. The sound wasn't flawless. The old bass carried the wear of years, but the warmth of the note wrapped around the students like a steady hand resting on their shoulders. Maya followed with her opening line. The violin trembled for the first few seconds, the bow quivering as she fought for control, but the melody carried her. Erin layered her cello beneath Maya's part, anchoring the fragile line with a soft, low foundation. Carlos entered next, letting the saxophone's gentle breath blend into the rising sound. The room swelled with the opening measures of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. The students played with hesitant strokes, at first unsure of themselves without their teacher guiding the tempo and emotion. But the music pulled them forward, note by note, into something larger than their fear. Keanu lifted his head slightly, and then he began to sing. The moment Keanu's voice rose from the back of the stage, the entire auditorium shifted. It wasn't the voice people associated with red carpets or interviews. It wasn't the voice of a movie star stepping into a role. It was softer, almost unguarded, carrying the weight of someone who had lived deeply and quietly. His tone was raw, whispery, threaded with a warmth that felt painfully human. Parents in the front row leaned forward, eyes widening in disbelief. A mother clasped her hands over her chest. A father stopped recording for a moment, forgetting his phone was even in his hand. The younger children, who had been squirming impatiently, fell still without being told. Even the air felt different, like it had shifted to hold the sound gently between its palms. Keanu's voice was not loud, but it didn't need to be. It drifted over the music like a fragile confession. Every lyric carried something personal, something quietly powerful, something that made listeners feel as though the song wasn't being performed but lived. He let the notes fall without force, letting emotion guide them rather than volume. The old bass hummed beneath him, supporting each phrase with a deep and steady pulse. The students felt the change the instant he began singing. Maya's bow steadied her trembling easing as she locked into the melody with a newfound confidence. Carlos played with softer breaths, matching the gentle phrasing of Keanu's voice. Erin leaned into her cello, letting the vibrations move through her ribcage, giving her enough strength to ride through her pain. Dante closed his eyes briefly, tapping into the rhythm with a controlled intensity he had never accessed before. The song grew richer, the orchestra gathering courage with each passing measure. They followed Keanu's voice like a lantern in the dark, leaning into its warmth. They felt the audience listening, truly listening. No whispers, no rustling, no shifting of feet, only presence. In the wings, the paramedics who had been wheeling Mr. Benton toward the exit heard the first verse drift toward them. One of them slowed, the other turned instinctively. For a moment, they forgot the urgency of their job, pausing to absorb the unexpected beauty echoing across the hallway. The school janitor, who had stepped into the wings to stack folding chairs for later cleanup, froze with his hands on the metal frames. He lifted his cap off his head, slowly, his eyes softening as he listened. He whispered something to himself, something quiet and reverent, as if he didn't want to disturb the air carrying the music. A student in the second row lifted her phone with shaky hands, blinking rapidly as she tried to keep the camera steady. She didn't intend to live stream the moment. It simply happened. Her instinct was to share, to let the world see the impossible thing taking shape right in front of her. And so, the moment began traveling beyond the auditorium walls. As the song reached its middle verses, something began to shift in the room. The students settled into the music as though the melody had wrapped around them, holding them steady. The trembling that had threatened their performance minutes earlier slowly melted away. Each note grew clearer, fuller, pulled forward by a purpose they hadn't known they could access without Mr. Benton guiding them. Maya lifted her violin higher, her bow gliding with more certainty. Carlos leaned into his phrasing, adding gentle emotion to each line. Erin pressed into the chords that gave the arrangement its heart, her arms moving in smooth arcs. Dante found a delicate balance, adding subtle rhythm with a sensitivity few had ever seen from him. They played not from confidence alone, but from something deeper, a shared belief rising inside them with every measure. Keanu carried the next verse with a tenderness that caught the audience off guard. His voice cracked just slightly on one of the lyrics, a tiny fracture that made the moment feel more real, more human, more unforgettable. The crack didn't break the song. It strengthened it. It gave every listener permission to feel something raw. A mother in the fourth row pressed a tissue to her eyes. A group of seniors who had come to support their younger siblings stared toward the stage with their mouths slightly open. A cluster of teachers near the back let their arms fall to their sides, the stress of the school year momentarily drifting away. Everything narrowed into one single line of music, fragile and sacred. Even the smallest sounds became part of the moment. A faint sniff, a choked breath. The subtle creak of a chair as someone leaned closer, drawn toward the music, as if pulled by an invisible thread. By the time Keanu reached the final chorus, the atmosphere had shifted from awe to something quieter, deeper, and heavier with emotion. His voice lowered to a near whisper on the first word of the last "Hallelujah," carrying a weight that made every parent in the room feel as though they were hearing something meant only for them. The orchestra followed with a softness that felt almost reverent. When the final note arrived, Keanu let it fall gently, his voice fading like the last light of a sunset slipping behind the horizon. The students held their final positions, bows and instruments poised in midair, breathing suspended. The auditorium remained utterly silent, not because the audience didn't know how to react, but because no one dared break the spell. Then slowly, the emotion that had been held in every chest surged upward. The entire auditorium erupted into tears. The final note lingered in the air long after it left the stage. It floated above the students, above the dim lights, above the rows of waiting families, until it seemed to settle in every corner of the auditorium. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, heavy, sacred, as if everyone in the room needed just one more breath to process what they had witnessed. Then slowly the applause began. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't loud or frantic. It started like the soft crash of a gentle wave rising from somewhere in the middle rows before spreading outward. Hands came together in slow, emotional rhythms, creating a sound that felt more like gratitude than celebration. Some parents clapped through tears. Others placed one hand over their heart, while the other joined the applause. A few covered their mouths, overwhelmed by the softness of what they had just experienced. A single mother standing in the back row mouthed the words, "Thank you," her eyes shining as she watched her daughter on stage. Her hands shook as she clapped, as if she wasn't just applauding the performance, but everything that had led to this moment. The students looked out at the audience in stunned quiet. They had expected fear. They had expected panic without Mr. Benton guiding them, but instead they saw admiration painted across every face. They saw pride shining in the eyes of parents who had never been able to witness such confidence from their children. They saw a room that felt united by something too big for words. Maya wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her wrist, trying not to smudge the bridge of her violin. Carlos lowered his saxophone slowly, his breath shuddering, as he realized he hadn't cracked a single note. Erin leaned slightly into her cello, letting the applause wash over her aching body like a gentle relief she hadn't expected to feel. Dante stared out into the crowd, stunned, as if trying to prove to himself that the reaction was real. Keanu stepped back from the bass, letting the students take the full glow of the moment. He didn't bow, he didn't wave. He simply nodded once quietly, respectfully, as though he had been given the honor of standing beside them rather than leading them. The applause continued, growing into something more certain and steady. The lights warmed, the audience leaned closer. The room felt alive in a way none of them had anticipated when the night began. Keanu stepped behind the last row of students and whispered gently that they should continue with the rest of their program. His voice was soft, but his certainty filled them with strength. And so they prepared to play again, this time not with fear, but with a confidence born from something unforgettable. The applause softened gradually, tapering into an emotional hush that encouraged the students to lift their instruments again. Their hands still shook, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from the weight of realizing they had already done the hardest part. They had stepped into an impossible moment and turned it into something extraordinary. Maya exchanged a glance with Carlos. It wasn't a conversation. It was an understanding. They were doing this for Mr. Benton. They were doing this for themselves. They were doing this because someone they admired had believed in them enough to stand beside them when everything seemed to fall apart. The assistant principal gave a shaky nod from the wings, signaling that the show could continue. She had wiped tears from her face and tried to hide how shaken she still felt. Even she couldn't deny that something special had taken shape on that stage, something fragile and powerful she never would have imagined when the evening began. The second piece on their program was a lighter arrangement, something cheerful and melodic. The students usually relied on Mr. Benton to guide the tempo, but after what they had just experienced, they didn't panic. Erin counted them in with a soft tap of her bow. Dante picked up the rhythm gently, adding a pulse that kept the ensemble together. Carlos lifted his saxophone again, letting his tone glide smoothly through the melody with a newfound steadiness. The music wasn't perfect. A few notes wavered, a rhythm slipped briefly, but none of that mattered. The performance carried a warmth that reached into the hearts of everyone watching. Parents whispered to each other when certain students took small solos. Younger siblings clapped along quietly. A teacher in the third row brushed away tears repeatedly, overwhelmed by how far the orchestra had come. Keanu stood quietly behind the group, the bass whistle resting against the side of the stage. He didn't take part in the second piece. He didn't need to. His presence alone had become a silent support, grounding the students in the knowledge that they were capable of more than they believed. As the song reached its final measures, the orchestra played with a kind of joyful energy that lifted the audience out of the heavy emotion of the first number. It felt like a reminder that music wasn't only about sorrow or power. It was also about hope, about connection, about rising after a fall. When the last note faded, another wave of applause swept through the room. This time it was stronger, more certain. The audience rose to their feet, clapping with a mixture of pride and disbelief at what their children had just accomplished without a conductor. On stage, the students stepped back, breathing hard, their faces flushed and glowing with relief. They had made it through the second piece, and something inside each of them felt different now, stronger, clearer, more sure of itself. The students bowed together after finishing their final number. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished, but it was sincere. Their smiles were soft and tired, the kind that appeared only after facing something overwhelming and finding the strength to move through it. Parents cheered louder this time, their voices rising above the applause. It wasn't just a reaction to the music, it was a reaction to the courage they had witnessed. For a moment, the students forgot the world beyond the stage. They forgot their fears, their nerves, the chaos backstage. They stood tall, knowing they had done something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Keanu stepped back, again letting them take the credit. He didn't need to be front and center. His role had already been fulfilled in the quietest way possible. He watched Maya take a small bow with her violin held close, watched Carlos flash the smallest smile when he spotted his father slipping into the back of the auditorium after finishing a shift early. Erin rested her hand on her cello, breathing through the ache with pride rather than strain. Dante let out a shaky laugh, overwhelmed by the sound of applause meant for all of them. When the curtain finally closed, the students hurried backstage with wide eyes and quivering breaths. Some laughed, some cried. Some did both. Carlos hugged his saxophone like it was a living thing. Maya collapsed briefly onto a chair, covering her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. Erin leaned against a wall to steady herself, her hands trembling with relief. Dante let his drumsticks fall to the floor, rubbing his eyes as if trying to understand how the night had unfolded. A student who had been live streaming everything held her phone up with shaking hands. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. Keanu Reeves didn't just give us scholarships tonight. He gave us faith. The words landed with a quiet force, as if the truth of them had been waiting the entire evening to be spoken aloud. The live stream continued, capturing the moment. Other students gathered around, some laughing through tears, others nodding in agreement. The video caught their raw emotion, the kind that wasn't staged, wasn't polished, wasn't meant to go viral. But the sincerity of it made it powerful. The feed uploaded instantly. Notifications buzzed across phones. Comments began appearing in real time from people who had never set foot in the auditorium. Within minutes, the video started spreading far beyond the school, and the night, which had begun with fear and uncertainty, began transforming into something much larger. The night wasn't even over when the first clips began spreading online. The live stream posted by the student backstage had already gained traction before the orchestra finished putting away their instruments. Notifications vibrated through pockets. Screens lit up. Parents whispered to each other as they checked their phones, unsure how a video posted only minutes earlier could already have hundreds of shares. By the time the last chair was stacked and the stage lights dimmed for the night, dozens of versions of the moment were circulating across social platforms. One clip showed the exact moment Keanu plucked the first note on the dusty bass, the auditorium falling silent as if the world took a breath with him. Another captured the soft tremble in Maya's bow as she played through her fear. Another highlighted the second verse of Keanu's performance, his voice carrying heavy emotion that made several viewers type comments like they didn't understand how someone so gentle could carry so much pain in a song. The students gathered in the hallway outside the music room, still buzzing from the performance. Someone opened their phone and gasped loudly enough to make everyone turn. The clip had started trending in the city, then the region, then nationwide. Every few seconds, the view count jumped. Comments poured in first from strangers in nearby towns, then from people on the other side of the country. Maya stared at the screen in disbelief. Carlos shook his head slowly, unable to speak. Erin scrolled through the comments with trembling fingers, her breath catching each time she read a message praising the courage of the young musicians. Dante leaned against the lockers, trying to hide the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The moment felt surreal, like something that didn't belong to their small school, but was somehow carrying their names across the country. Within 2 hours, major pages and fan accounts had reposted the clips. One upload had the title, "Keanu Reeves Saves a School Concert with Hallelujah," and had already reached hundreds of thousands of views. A popular news anchor tweeted a short message saying the performance brought him to tears. A well-known musician commented that he wished he had been in the room to witness the moment live. The students huddled closer as the views kept climbing. Someone whispered that this couldn't be real. Another whispered that maybe it was exactly as real as it felt. Across the city, in homes where people prepared for bedtime, phones buzzed with notifications as the clip continued to multiply across feeds. People who normally scrolled past videos without stopping paused, rewound, and watched again. Something about the sincerity in Keanu's voice, the trembling bravery of the students, and the raw emotion in the auditorium made the video feel like a gift shared at the perfect moment. It was no longer just a school performance. It was becoming a story. By midnight, the clip had reached beyond the social circles of parents and local residents. Entertainment blogs began posting short headlines filled with disbelief. A late-night radio host replayed audio from the performance, describing the sound as something he couldn't forget. Fans of Keanu across the country reacted with a mixture of shock, admiration, and emotion that built into a wave of momentum. By sunrise, Keanu Sings Hallelujah trended in multiple cities, without any coordinated promotion, without any celebrity endorsement, without Keanu posting a single word. It spread because people felt something when they watched it, and they wanted others to feel it too. The students woke up to numbers they couldn't wrap their minds around. Maya blinked at her phone screen, repeatedly rubbing her eyes, as if the view count might disappear if she looked away too long. Erin checked her notifications in bed, startled by messages from distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Carlos found himself tagged in videos by strangers, calling him the sax player who held it together. Dante scrolled through endless comments from viewers who said the rhythm he played changed the atmosphere of the entire piece. But the most surprising thing wasn't the attention. It was the tone of the responses. People weren't laughing, they weren't mocking, they weren't treating the video like a novelty. They were reacting with sincerity. Comments poured in, "I've never cried during a school concert before. This is the kind of man we need more of. I can't explain it. Something in that song made me feel hope again. Faith. That's what he gave them. Faith." Viewers shared stories of their own school concerts, of teachers who changed their lives, of moments when music had held them together in dark seasons. It was as if the video had unlocked something quiet inside people, reminding them of memories they hadn't revisited in years. Major news networks caught up quickly. Morning shows replayed clips, adding captions that highlighted the emotional nature of the moment. Reporters requested comments from the school district, from the students, from anyone connected to the event. One network placed the video at the top of its most viewed section for the day. Meanwhile, Keanu remained silent, not in avoidance, but in respect. He didn't want the moment to become about him. He wasn't interested in interviews that turned something intimate into a spectacle. When a popular talk show asked him to appear and perform the song live, he politely declined. When a producer reached out asking for an exclusive statement, he responded with a brief message. "I just filled in until the kids found their strength." Those were the only words he allowed to circulate. The world wasn't used to someone refusing attention when handed a viral moment. That silence made the story grow even bigger. By midday, the clip crossed 10 million views. By evening, it passed 40 million. What surprised the students most wasn't the speed, but the feeling behind every share. People weren't spreading the video for shock value. They were sharing it the way someone shares a moment of light on a dark day. Something gentle, something hopeful, something they wanted others to experience. Teachers gathered in the lounge on their breaks, watching the clip together in stunned silence. The superintendent forwarded the link to every administrator in the district. A teacher from another state sent an email to Ridgewood High saying the video made her remember why she became an educator. Musicians wrote messages of admiration for the kids, praising their courage, their heart, their ability to keep playing when their world shook. Meanwhile, the students returned to school the next day in a blur of disbelief. They expected excitement, maybe congratulations, maybe even some teasing from classmates who hadn't believed they could pull off the performance. What they didn't expect was the quiet respect that met them the moment they stepped through the doors. Students from different grades approached Maya and told her the video made them cry. A group of seniors greeted Carlos outside his math class, asking him how he stayed so calm on stage. Erin found a handwritten note taped to her locker that said her cello part was beautiful. Dante received nods from people he had never spoken to before, the kind of nods that meant they finally saw him for the person he was trying to become. News vans lined the sidewalk near the front of the school by lunchtime. Reporters called out questions, asking for statements. Microphones pointed toward the students. Cameras zoomed in, hoping to capture something sensational. But the staff kept the kids moving, shielding them from the noise. Through all of it, Keanu stayed out of sight. He avoided the attention deliberately. He didn't show up for interviews or respond to invitations. He didn't upload anything. He didn't post a single picture from the event. Instead, he continued with his quiet schedule, visiting a charity meeting in the morning, riding his motorcycle through a quiet stretch of road in the afternoon, and answering only one question when a journalist caught up with him outside a parking garage. He repeated the same words he had already released. "I just filled in until the kids found their strength. Nothing more." Reporters pressed for details. He didn't offer any. They asked how he felt about the attention. He shrugged softly and said the moment belonged to the students, not him. They pressed for personal insight. He told them he preferred to let the music speak for itself. That humble silence only made the world talk about him more. But for Keanu, the moment was already complete. The kids had found their strength, and that to him was the whole story. Mr. Harold Benton drifted in and out of consciousness as the hospital monitors hummed softly around him. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the faint footsteps of nurses moving down the corridor. When his eyes finally opened fully, he blinked slowly, trying to make sense of where he was and why he felt so weak. His limbs felt heavy, his throat dry, and his memories blurry. A nurse standing beside his bed noticed him stirring. She smiled with gentle relief, stepping closer to adjust the blankets around him. She told him his blood sugar had dropped dangerously low, that he had collapsed backstage during the concert, and that he was lucky someone had called for help immediately. She handed him a small cup of water, guiding it carefully toward his trembling hands. As he sipped, she chuckled softly and said he had missed quite a show. The words confused him at first. He remembered the rush backstage, the students lining up, the mixture of nerves and excitement in their faces. He remembered the pressure building behind his eyes. Then, nothing. Just darkness. He asked what she meant, his voice scratchy from hours of sleep and dehydration. The nurse simply pointed to his phone on the bedside table. She said it had been buzzing non-stop since the night before, vibrating so much that she had to silence it to let him rest. With a nod of permission, she placed the phone in his hand. When Mr. Benton unlocked the screen, the notifications flooded over him in endless streams. Messages from colleagues, missed calls from administrators, dozens of texts from parents, hundreds of social media alerts. His confusion deepened as he scrolled through link after link, showing his students on stage without him. He clicked the first video someone had sent. The moment it played, he froze. He saw Maya in the front row, her bow poised but trembling. He saw Carlos holding his saxophone with a steadiness he didn't know the boy possessed. He saw Erin fighting to keep her breathing calm. He saw Dante gripping his drumsticks like they were lifelines. Then he saw Keanu behind them with the old-school bass. The camera shook as the student filming wiped away tears, but the audio was unmistakable. The first notes of Hallelujah floated through the tiny speaker, warm and fragile. Mr. Benton felt something twist deep inside his chest as the students began playing, each one carrying their part with courage he had always believed they had, but had never seen them perform without him. Then Keanu's voice entered, raw, quiet, heartbreaking. The nurse stepped back when she saw the tears gathering in Mr. Benton's eyes. He tried to blink them away at first, but the more he watched, the harder it became to breathe steadily. The performance unfolded in front of him like something unreal, his students stepping into their strength, holding themselves together, carrying each other exactly the way he had always hoped they would. When the final chorus arrived and the audience began crying, Mr. Benton could no longer hold back his own tears. When the video ended, Mr. Benton sat motionless, staring at the dark screen of his phone, as if he were afraid that moving might break whatever fragile meaning had settled inside him. The nurse placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, but she didn't speak. She could see that words would only interrupt what he was feeling. His breath trembled, tears slid down the sides of his face, unchecked. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't shock. It was something deeper, an overwhelming mix of pride and heartbreak. He replayed the video, then again, and again. Each time he noticed something new. He saw how Maya steadied her bow in the middle of the first verse, gathering her courage. He saw Carlos lean into the melody with a confidence he had never shown in rehearsal. He saw Erin's quiet strength, her focus holding the cello line together. He saw Dante's rhythm carrying the group when the tempo wavered, and behind them, Keanu stood tall and calm, filling the empty space without making it his own. It was everything he ever taught them. Not perfection, not fearlessness, but heart. They played with heart when he couldn't stand there with them. They played because he had taught them how. Weeks passed before he could return to school. Doctors insisted he rest, monitor his diet carefully, and avoid overexerting himself. The students sent him a steady stream of messages, drawings, jokes, short videos, thanking him for being their teacher. He read every one, slowly letting each word heal a piece of him. When he finally felt strong enough to visit the school, he expected a quiet welcome. Maybe a wave from a teacher or two. Maybe a student noticing him in the hallway. He wasn't prepared for what actually waited for him. As he stepped through the front doors, the hallway erupted into cheers. Dozens of students crowded around him, staff guiding them gently so they wouldn't overwhelm him. Pinned on the wall beside the music room door was a massive handmade poster painted with bright colors and uneven letters. "You taught us to play with heart. We played for you." The message hit him harder than any headline or news clip ever could. His knees nearly gave out, and he had to place a hand on the doorframe to steady himself. The students saw the emotion in his eyes and rushed closer. Maya wrapped her arms around him first, followed by Carlos, Erin, and Dante. Soon, the entire orchestra joined, creating a circle of warmth around the man who had given them more than music lessons. Mr. Benton hugged each of them, his voice too soft to reach all their ears, but filled with gratitude nonetheless. He had never expected recognition. He had only wanted to give these kids a chance to find themselves in music. Later that afternoon, a delivery arrived at the school office, a large case addressed to him. Inside was a bass, polished and beautiful, signed by every member of the orchestra. And a small note from Keanu, for the teacher who taught them to believe. Maya sat on the edge of her bed 2 nights after the viral performance, her violin resting beside her. She kept replaying the night in her mind, the trembling first note, the soft rise of hallelujah, the quiet strength she felt when Keanu nodded at her. For the first time in her life, she had played not from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt like her own voice rising to the surface. But alongside that new courage came a familiar knot of worry. Her parents still didn't know. For months, she had gone to orchestra rehearsals under the excuse of tutoring. She had practiced quietly in the school practice rooms, terrified they would hear her at home and decide music was a waste of time. They weren't unkind. They were simply practical. They worked long hours and believed in stability. Art, they said gently, was better as a hobby than a dream. But after the concert, all she could think about was how much she wanted them to understand how important music was to her, how much she needed them to know who she really was. The courage she found on stage lingered inside her like the final echo of a note. She didn't want to hide anymore. That weekend, she asked her parents if she could talk to them. They sat with her at the kitchen table, surprised by the seriousness in her voice. Her mother wiped flour from her hands after baking bread, sensing something important was coming. Her father switched off the radio, leaning forward with quiet concern. Maya's heart pounded, but she didn't back out. She told them everything. She told them about joining the orchestra. She told them about the hours she had spent practicing. She told them about Mr. Benton, the way he encouraged her even when she trembled. She told them about performing at the concert. And finally, she told them how Keanu Reeves had stepped in when her teacher collapsed, how she had found the courage to play because someone believed she could. Her parents stared at her in stunned silence. Her mother covered her mouth, tears forming quickly. Her father blinked repeatedly, trying to take it all in. They had no idea she had carried so much alone. No idea she had been hiding something so important. When she finished, her father stood up, walked to her gently, and placed his hand on her shoulder. He told her he wished she had told them sooner, not because he was upset, but because he didn't know she had been doing something that brought her so much joy. Her mother hugged her tightly, the kind of hug meant to make up for lost time. Then her father said they wanted to hear her play. Maya froze. It was her greatest dream and her greatest fear. Her hands shook as she lifted the violin, but she didn't back away. She took a deep breath, brought the bow to the strings, and began to play. It wasn't perfect. She cracked on one note. Her bow slipped once. But she played with heart. For the first time, she played without hiding. When Maya finished playing, the kitchen felt different. Not larger, not brighter, but fuller, as if her music had stitched something new into the room. Her parents didn't speak right away. Her mother wiped her cheeks, embarrassed by how quickly the tears had come. Her father looked at Maya with a softness she hadn't seen since she was a little girl, learning to ride a bike. He told her the truth. They weren't shocked because they disapproved. They were shocked because they had never imagined she had been holding so much talent, fear, and longing behind closed doors. They had been so focused on making life stable that they had missed the quiet places where their daughter was growing. Her mother asked her to play another piece. Maya hesitated, then nodded. She played the small melody she often practiced in empty hallways at school. Her hands steadied as she moved through familiar phrases. Her father leaned closer, listening like someone discovering a new language. When she finished, he told her she had a gift and that they wanted to support her from now on. The next week, her parents asked when her next recital was. She laughed at the question because it felt unreal to hear it from them. The school was hosting a small community showcase in the cafeteria, a modest event compared to the concert with Keanu, but it mattered more to her than anything she had done before. When the night arrived, Maya stepped onto the small makeshift stage with her violin resting lightly against her shoulder. She scanned the crowd and spotted her parents in the front row. Her mother waved with both hands as if Maya were performing at a grand hall. Her father gave a steady thumbs up, his smile wide and certain. That single moment made her chest tighten with gratitude. She played with confidence. Her sound wasn't the strongest in the room, nor was she the most technically skilled. But she played with a new certainty. She no longer hid her trembling, she let it guide her. Her music held emotion the way a painter holds color, shaping it into something personal. The audience applauded warmly. Her parents stood clapping with a pride that made Maya laugh out loud on stage. The fear that had shadowed her for so long began to fade, replaced by something bright and fragile and growing stronger every day. Weeks later, she began writing her own small compositions. At first, they were simple lines of melody she recorded on her phone. Then they became full pieces she shared with Mr. Benton during lunch breaks. He encouraged her, helping her refine each idea with gentle suggestions. She submitted one to a regional youth scholarship competition, not expecting much. When she received the acceptance letter, she held it so tightly her hands shook. She showed her parents first, then her friends, then her teacher. The night she won, Keanu was riding his motorcycle along a quiet stretch of road when he saw a clip posted online of Maya receiving the award. He pulled over, watched the short video twice, and smiled. A quiet, proud smile. Then he sent her a single thumbs-up emoji. Carlos's father, Miguel Alvarez, finished his shift at the metal fabrication plant just after midnight. The facility was still humming with machines cooling down, steel settling, and forklifts backing into storage positions for the night. His hands were rough and sore from hours of lifting and welding, and his boots were coated with a fine layer of dust. Every muscle in his body ached, but he carried the same quiet endurance he always had. Providing for his family mattered more than rest. He didn't know what had happened at Ridgewood High that night. He had been working overtime and hadn't been able to slip away early the way he had hoped. All he knew was that his son had a concert and that Carlos had left the house with his saxophone case held tightly in both hands, trying to hide how nervous he was. Miguel had promised he would try to make it, but the factory needed him, and promises made under pressure often felt like hope rather than certainty. When he reached the break room to clock out, two of his co-workers were huddled around a phone. Their eyes widened when they saw him walk in. "You need to watch this," one of them said, nudging the screen toward him. Miguel frowned, pulling off his work gloves. He stepped closer with confusion. It took a moment for the video to buffer, and he leaned in, squinting at the tiny image. When the footage stabilized, he saw a shaky view of the school auditorium. He saw rows of parents. He saw a bright wash of stage lights. Then he saw the orchestra. And standing in the second row, saxophone lifted with trembling confidence, was his son, Carlos. Miguel's breath caught. He grabbed the phone with both hands before he even realized he was moving. As the first notes of the orchestra filled the small break room speakers, he felt an ache rise in his chest. Then he heard the soft pluck of the bass, followed by a voice he recognized. His co-workers chimed in, telling him Keanu Reeves had stepped in when the music teacher collapsed, but he barely heard them. All his attention was locked on one thing, the determined posture of his boy. Carlos wasn't just playing. He was focused, proud, part of something bigger than himself. Miguel watched the moment his son inhaled deeply before entering the melody, his tone smooth and steady, even though his fingers trembled slightly. Tears gathered so quickly in Miguel's eyes that the screen blurred. He wiped them with the back of his wrist, embarrassed at first, then overwhelmed by the truth pressing through his ribs. "That's my son up there," he whispered. The words came out cracked, soft, but unmistakable. His co-workers fell silent, giving him the space to feel the moment. When the final chorus reached the break room, and the audience on the screen erupted into tears, Miguel lowered the phone and covered his eyes with one hand. He didn't care that he was crying in front of grown men covered in grit and grease. Pride didn't need polishing. It simply needed truth. Miguel didn't go home right away. He stayed in the break room for several minutes after the video ended, sitting in the same metal chair with his hands covering his face. His co-workers didn't tease him or make jokes. They understood what pride looked like in its rawest form. One of them squeezed his shoulder before heading out the door, telling him he had raised a good kid. Miguel nodded, unable to speak, his throat too tight to form words. When he finally drove home, he kept replaying the video in his mind. Every note, every breath, every moment Carlos held himself together on stage. He had always known his son loved music, but he hadn't realized how deep that passion ran. He wished he had been there in person. He wished he had seen it with his own eyes instead of a screen. But he was grateful he saw it at all. Carlos was awake when he walked in, sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread around him. His saxophone case was propped against the chair beside him. He looked up quickly, eyes widening when he saw his father's expression. "Dad," he asked softly, "are you okay?" Miguel didn't respond right away. He crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled Carlos into a tight embrace, the kind of hug that came from a place deeper than words. Carlos froze in surprise for a moment, then slowly hugged him back, his hands gripping his father's shoulders. "I saw you," Miguel whispered. "I saw the whole thing. I'm proud of you, hijo." Those words hit Carlos harder than any compliment he had ever received. His eyes stung and he blinked rapidly as he pulled away to look at his father. Miguel told him how the entire break room fell silent during the performance, how the men stopped what they were doing just to listen. He said Carlos wasn't just good. He was powerful, moving, brave. Carlos sat down, overwhelmed. He admitted he had been disappointed when he saw the empty seat in the audience where his father had hoped to be. Miguel apologized, but Carlos shook his head. Hearing what had happened at the factory made everything make sense. His father wasn't absent, he was providing. And now he was here. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, something changed in Carlos. He practiced more often, but not with the same nervous desperation he had before. He played with intention, focus, joy. He started tutoring younger students who wanted to learn saxophone, meeting them after school in the music room or in the courtyard when the weather was warm. He discovered he enjoyed teaching, especially when he saw shy kids open up the same way he once had. His reputation spread quietly. Soon, a local community college reached out with an offer for a mentorship program for promising young musicians. The opportunity wasn't a full scholarship, but it was a door to experience guidance and future possibilities. When Carlos told his father, Miguel placed both hands on his son's shoulders and told him he deserved every good thing coming his way. Carlos believed him, maybe for the first time in his life. Erin sat on the edge of her bed with her cello leaning gently against her knee, the soft lamplight casting warm shadows across the room. Her body ached in its familiar way, a slow, pulsing discomfort that had grown more intense since the night of the concert. She had pushed herself harder than usual that night, and though she would never regret a second, the soreness afterward was almost unbearable. Her doctor had warned her again to rest, to pace herself, to be cautious with flare-ups. But music didn't always allow for caution. Sometimes it demanded courage instead. She lifted her bow and drew it softly across the strings, letting a single low note hum through the quiet room. The vibration soothed her the way it always did, grounding her breath and calming the tightness in her joints. She wasn't practicing tonight. She wasn't preparing for anything. She just needed comfort, and music had always been the only place she could find it. After a few minutes, she set the bow down and reached for a sheet of paper. For days, she had been thinking about the moment Keanu stepped behind the orchestra, calm and steady, supporting them with nothing but presence and heart. She kept replaying how he had nodded toward her as the song began, how his expression had been quiet, but understanding, as if he knew she was fighting through more than stage fright. Maybe he didn't know her story. Maybe he didn't need to. But she wanted him to understand what his presence had meant to her. She wanted him to understand why she played even when breathing hurt, and why that night had been one of the most important of her life. So she began to write. She wrote, slowly pausing between sentences when her hand cramped. She told him about the chronic condition that had shaped her childhood. She told him about the physical therapy sessions, the bad days when she could barely lift her arms, the mornings when she didn't want to get out of bed at all. She wrote about how music became her relief, her focus, her small escape from a body that didn't always cooperate. She explained how holding the cello gave her a sense of strength she never felt anywhere else. She told him the truth that sometimes she practiced with tears streaming down her face, not because she was sad, but because each note pushed her past the pain. Then she wrote about the concert. She described the panic when Mr. Benton collapsed, the fear that she might not be strong enough to play without him, the trembling in her chest when she lifted her bow. And she described the exact moment Keanu stepped behind them, picking up the bass with calm hands. That moment had anchored her. In a way she couldn't explain, it reminded her she wasn't alone. By the time she finished, her letter filled 2 full pages. Her handwriting wobbled in places where her fingers had stiffened, but the words were clear. She sealed the envelope, wrote his name carefully on the front, and hoped he would read it with the same sincerity she felt writing it. Erin mailed the letter the next morning, slipping it into the blue postal box outside her doctor's office. She stood there for a moment, with her hand hovering above the chute, almost tempted to reach in and retrieve it. Sharing her story felt vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to. Playing music exposed her emotions, but this letter exposed her truth. After a long breath, she let her hand fall to her side and walked away, hoping she had done the right thing. A week passed without a response, then another. Erin didn't lose hope, but she tried not to expect anything either. Keanu Reeves was a global figure. He probably received thousands of letters a month. She reminded herself that writing to him had already helped her understand her own resilience more clearly. Then one quiet afternoon, after school, a small padded envelope arrived with her name on it. The handwriting was simple, precise, and unfamiliar. Her mother handed it to her with raised eyebrows, joking softly about who might be sending secret mail. Erin didn't answer. Her heart was already pounding too fast. She carried the envelope to her room, closed the door, and sat on the floor with her back pressed against the bed. For a moment, she simply held it, letting the anticipation settle. Then she carefully tore the top open and pulled out a folded sheet of paper along with a thin cardboard backing. When she unfolded the paper, her breath caught. It wasn't a typed response. It wasn't a formal signature. It was a hand-drawn sketch. A detailed, gently shaded drawing of a young Keanu holding his first bass, the instrument leaning awkwardly against his shoulder. His hair was long, his posture crooked with inexperience, but his expression was unmistakable, uncertain, hopeful, and trying his best. The sketch captured a moment of beginning of vulnerability, meeting determination. Beneath the drawing was a short, handwritten note. Pain doesn't silence music. It reveals it. There was no signature, no flourish, just those words. But Erin didn't need anything more. She pressed the sketch to her chest, tears filling her eyes. Someone who understood loneliness, confusion, and quiet battles had taken the time to draw something that connected their experiences across decades. The note didn't make her pain disappear, but it made her feel seen. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened. A small, independent filmmaker visited Ridgewood High after hearing about the viral concert. He was working on a documentary about young musicians living with chronic illnesses, and Erin's name kept surfacing in his research. When he interviewed her, he listened with sincere interest as she talked about her music, her challenges, and the night that changed her life. She didn't bring up the drawing right away. When she finally did, showing him the sketch, he was stunned by its simplicity and emotional power. He asked permission to include it in the documentary. Erin agreed, but only if the focus remained on the message and not the celebrity. When the documentary released months later, her segment became the emotional centerpiece, one girl's story of pain, perseverance, and the music that helped her breathe through it. And though Keanu never stepped into the spotlight to take credit, the drawing remained quietly tucked in Erin's room, reminding her that strength could be soft and still be real. Dante had never been the kind of kid teachers described with glowing phrases. His school file carried words like impulsive, distracted, and disruptive. His reputation followed him through hallways, whispered by classmates who didn't know him, and sighed by adults who assumed they did. For years, he had been labeled the troublemaker, the kid most likely to get suspended, the one everyone expected to fail. Somewhere along the way, he stopped arguing with those expectations. It became easier to lean into them than push against them. But the night of the concert, standing on stage, with trembling hands, hearing the soft hum of Keanu's voice behind him, and feeling the weight of the music they created together, something cracked open inside him. He had always loved rhythm. He had always needed it. But that night showed him something new rhythm could build, not just break. Discipline wasn't a punishment. It was a doorway. The weeks following the viral performance felt strange. People looked at Dante differently. Teachers greeted him with cautious optimism instead of bracing for conflict. Students who once avoided him now stopped to talk, asking about drums, about the concert, about what it felt like to play alongside Keanu Reeves. Dante wasn't used to answers. He wasn't used to being asked anything meaningful at all. Mr. Benton returned to school slowly, still recovering, but he made a point to find Dante the moment he stepped back into the music room. He pulled the boy aside, looked him straight in the eye, and told him how proud he was, not for playing perfectly, but for holding the beat when everyone else wavered. That single acknowledgement hit Dante harder than any punishment or lecture ever had. It was the first time in years someone spoke to him not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with potential. Dante went home that afternoon and stared at his drumsticks for a long time. They weren't expensive. They were scuffed, uneven, and worn from too many hours tapping on desks, tables, and the backs of bus seats. But when he held them now, they felt different. They felt like tools, not toys. Possibility, not distraction. A week later, he asked the community center near his neighborhood if he could reserve the small multi-purpose room on Saturdays. The administrator hesitated. Dante wasn't known for calm activities, but agreed after hearing his plan. He wanted to run a free drum workshop for younger kids. Nothing formal, no sheet music, just a chance for them to feel rhythm the way he did. The first Saturday, only 3 kids showed up. 2 were neighbors. 1 was the little brother of a classmate. They sat on overturned buckets and old practice pads while Dante showed them how to hold sticks, how to breathe with the beat, how to feel the tempo in their chest. He wasn't polished. He wasn't a teacher. But the kids listened, copying his movements with wide eyes and hopeful grins. Something about teaching lit a spark in Dante, a spark he didn't know he had. Word of Dante's workshop spread faster than he expected. By the 3rd Saturday, 10 kids showed up with makeshift drums, old pots, overturned buckets, even plastic storage bins. Some brought nothing at all and tapped rhythm on their legs. Dante didn't turn anyone away. He greeted each kid by name, handed out spare sticks he had bought with his own savings, and showed them how rhythm could help settle nerves, sharpen focus, or release frustration. The more he taught them, the calmer he became himself. His mother noticed the change first. She saw how he woke up earlier, how he cleaned his room without being asked, how he spent nights practicing patterns instead of scrolling through his phone or getting into arguments online. One morning, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, writing out workshop ideas on a napkin, tapping rhythms with a pencil against his mug. She watched him quietly, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and gratitude she didn't know how to express. At school, teachers began commenting on his improvement. His science teacher emailed the office, praising his effort on a group project. His math teacher noted that while Dante still struggled, he showed patience he didn't have before. Even the principal pulled him aside one afternoon to say she had heard about his workshops and was proud of the leadership he was showing. Dante didn't always know how to respond to praise, but he carried those words with him like steady beats, guiding him forward. The turning point came when his mother called the school one afternoon. Her voice shook with emotion as she asked to speak to the principal. When the call connected, she told the principal something she had waited years to say. Her voice cracked as she said that the orchestra had saved her boy. She said that the night of the concert had changed everything, that Keanu and Mr. Benton had stepped into Dante's life at the exact moment he needed someone to believe he wasn't lost. The principal listened quietly, moved to tears by the sincerity in the mother's voice. Dante learned about the call only later when his mother hugged him in the kitchen after dinner. She didn't explain at first, she just held him tightly. When she finally spoke, she told him how proud she was and how far he had come. Dante didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to feeling worthy of pride. But hearing the emotion in his mother's voice anchored him in a way he had never felt before. Season by season, Dante's reputation transformed. Teachers who once expected trouble now expected effort. Students who once mocked him now asked for rhythm tips. Younger kids treated him like a mentor. His Saturday workshops became a regular event at the community center, with volunteers offering to help and local musicians donating extra equipment. Dante always credited the same two people for his transformation, Mr. Benton and Keanu Reeves. He said they didn't save him with speeches or lectures. They saved him with belief. They saved him by showing him what he could be instead of what he had been. And every time he lifted his drumsticks, he carried that belief in every beat. Months passed after the viral concert, and life at Ridgewood High slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The excitement had faded, but something lasting remained in the hallways. Students walked with more confidence. Teachers carried a renewed sense of purpose. The music program, once overlooked, now felt like the beating heart of the school. Keanu watched all of it from a distance. He never spoke publicly about the event, never capitalized on the attention, never tried to turn the story into a spotlight. But he followed the school's updates with quiet interest, checking in through brief emails with Mr. Benton and occasional messages from the administration, thanking him again for stepping in when things could have collapsed. He didn't reply to most of those messages. He didn't need to. The moment had spoken for itself. But one cool Saturday morning, Keanu found himself driving toward Santa Clarita again. There was no press, no announcement, no fanfare. He hadn't told the school he was coming. The trunk of his car was filled with instrument cases, brand new violins, cellos, drum pads, saxophones, and a polished bass that gleamed in the morning light. He had arranged the donation through a foundation so his name would never appear on the paperwork. The school would receive the instruments anonymously. The kids would never be told who was behind it. That was exactly how he wanted it. He parked in the staff lot, the same place he had parked the night of the concert. The building looked calm, the campus empty except for a few maintenance workers preparing for the week ahead. With no one around, Keanu carried the instruments quietly toward the music room, balancing them with practiced care. He made several trips, never rushing, his footsteps echoing softly in the hallways. The music room door gave its familiar creak as he opened it. The scent of rosin and old sheet music filled the air, mixed with faint traces of dust. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, casting long golden beams across the floor and warming the rows of stands and chairs. It felt unchanged and yet somehow sacred, as though the room remembered the night when everything had shifted. Keanu set each instrument down slowly, arranging them neatly on the front tables. Violins in one row, cellos in another, woodwinds to the side, the polished bass leaning carefully near the conductor's stand. He ran a gentle hand along its neck, smiling at the thought of some future student discovering their first spark of confidence through its deep, warm notes. Once everything was in place, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden plaque. The engraving was simple, but meant more to him than any headline printed after the concert. In honor of those who play with heart. He found an open space on the wall near the front of the room and mounted it carefully, tightening the screws one at a time. When he stepped back, the plaque caught the morning light just right, glowing softly as though it belonged there from the beginning. As Keanu stepped back to admire the plaque, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. He didn't need applause to validate what had happened months earlier. The moment had already served its purpose. The room itself felt like a memory echoing in slow motion. He could almost hear the trembling first note of Hallelujah, the soft breath of the students gathering courage, the sound of the audience falling into a hush so deep it felt like a collective prayer. He let that memory settle before turning toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, a familiar figure approached from the far end, pushing a mop bucket. It was the school janitor, the same man who had stood in the wings during the concert with his cap pressed against his chest. He stopped in his tracks when he recognized Keanu walking alone down the empty corridor. "Well, I'll be," the janitor murmured with a soft smile. "Didn't expect to see you back here." Keanu nodded gently, offering the man the warm, quiet smile he was known for. He didn't rush to explain himself. He simply stood there with the same calm presence he carried the night of the performance. The janitor pushed his mop bucket closer and leaned on the handle with interest. "School doesn't open for a few hours," the janitor said. "You visiting someone?" Keanu shook his head. "Just dropping something off." The janitor's eyes flicked toward the music room behind him. He didn't pry, but there was a knowing softness in his expression. He had seen enough to guess what was happening. After a moment, he let out a thoughtful breath. "They'll never forget what you did here," he said quietly. Keanu glanced back at the music room door, where the sunlight still spilled out into the hallway. His voice remained soft, steady, carrying the same humble honesty he used when the world tried to give him credit he didn't seek. "I won't either." The janitor nodded slowly, as though the simplicity of those words said everything. He straightened his cap and added that the school had changed since the concert. Kids walked taller, teachers spoke with more hope. The orchestra room had become a place where students gathered even when they didn't have practice, as if the music had left something behind in the walls. He said he saw kids stop by after class just to run their fingers along the instruments, remembering the night that had moved the entire community. Keanu listened with a gentle stillness. Moments like these mattered to him. Not the fame, not the virality, not the headlines, the quiet aftershocks of kindness, the way a single moment could ripple into 100 new beginnings. He thanked the janitor, shook his hand, and made his way toward the exit. As he stepped outside, the morning sun warmed the pavement, and the campus felt peaceful, almost sacred in its silence. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. The instruments were in place, the plaque was on the wall, and the heart of the school was still beating strong. Years later, long after the viral clip faded from trending lists, the story of Ridgewood High's orchestra lived on quietly in the lives of the students who had stood on that stage. The moment had not been a peak they never again reached. It became a beginning, a turning point, a piece of memory that followed each of them into adulthood, shaping the way they moved through the world. A documentary crew revisited the story on its 10-year anniversary, searching for the students who had once held trembling instruments, while Keanu Reeves stood behind them like a silent shield. Each of the former orchestra members now lived in different cities, pursuing different dreams. But when asked about that night, their voices carried the same softness, an echo of music that had never really left them. Maya sat in a bright recording studio, surrounded by sheets of her own handwritten compositions. Her hair was longer now, tied loosely behind her. On the wall sat framed awards from competitions she had won over the years, but she never spoke of those first. Instead, she talked about the night she found her voice in front of an auditorium filled with strangers. She described how that moment pushed her to begin composing, how her first scholarship felt like a door swinging open. She said she still kept a picture of the Ridgewood stage taped inside her notebook, a reminder of where her journey began. Carlos welcomed the film crew into a modest music classroom at a small community center. The whiteboard behind him was covered in rhythm exercises. A row of young students practiced scales in the background, filling the air with familiar stumbles and laughter. Carlos explained how his father's pride that night changed everything for him. He said he became a teacher because he knew what it felt like to have someone believe in you for the first time. He hoped to offer his students the same steady confidence he found the night of the concert. Erin appeared on screen from a quiet therapy room filled with soft lighting and instruments used for rehabilitation sessions. She sat beside a young patient, tapping a gentle rhythm on a drum pad. Erin smiled as she explained how her own experiences with pain led her toward music therapy. She talked about the drawing Keanu sent her, still framed on her bedside table. She said that note, "Pain doesn't silence music, it reveals it," became her guiding philosophy in her work. Then the camera shifted to Dante, standing inside a youth music center he now ran with a small team of volunteers. The center was filled with color, sound, and kids eager to explore instruments stacked neatly along the walls. Dante looked older, steadier, but the spark in his eyes remained. He recounted how his life changed after that concert, how Mr. Benton and Keanu showed him what discipline could mean. He pointed to the group of kids practicing in the corner and said he saw his younger self in each of them. He told the crew that music saved him not by fixing his problems, but by giving him a rhythm to move forward. Each former student had grown into a different path, a different expression of the same night that shaped them all. When the documentary crew asked each of them what they remembered most about the night of the concert, their answers came without hesitation. Maya remembered the moment her bow steadied because she felt something stronger than fear. Carlos remembered scanning the audience and realizing he could stand tall even when his father wasn't there to see it. Erin remembered how the cello's vibration cut through her pain like a thread of light. Dante remembered the quiet nod Keanu gave him the first time he felt someone trusted him to hold a rhythm that mattered. The documentary cut between their interviews, weaving their reflections together until their separate memories formed a single shared truth. The years had given them new experiences, new responsibilities, new versions of themselves, but none of them spoke about success or achievements as the defining moment. They all returned to that same stage, that same night, that same trembling beginning that became something much more. The footage shifted to the Ridgewood High Auditorium, now renovated and brighter, but still carrying the familiar layout. The new music director walked the crew through the space, pointing out a small wooden plaque on the wall near the front of the room. The camera zoomed in on the engraving that had begun to fade just slightly with time, in honor of those who play with heart. The director explained that no one knew exactly who had donated the instruments or placed the plaque, though everyone had their guesses. Over the years, the plaque became something of a legend among the students. They touched it before performances, whispered wishes beside it, or paused to collect themselves during stressful days. It had become a symbol of the program's identity. When the documentary crew asked if the former orchestra members wanted to visit the music room again, each one agreed without hesitation. They returned at different times, walking through the door with quiet smiles, touching the plaque as though greeting an old friend. Standing in the space brought back memories so vivid that they could almost hear the breaths of their younger selves, feel the nerves in their fingertips, and sense the warmth of the lights on their skin. During the final set of interviews, the crew asked one last question. What did that night teach you? Maya paused, her eyes softening. She said it taught her that courage doesn't always come from certainty. Sometimes it comes from choosing to try one more time. Carlos answered that it taught him that one moment of belief from a teacher, from a parent, from a stranger, could change the course of a life. Erin said the night taught her that even pain had a place in music, that emotion did not weaken her playing, but shaped it. Dante leaned back in his chair and said the night taught him he didn't have to be who everyone expected him to be. He could choose a different rhythm. In the final montage, their voices overlapped into a single message as the camera drifted over scenes of their adult lives. Music held us together when nothing else could. That night taught us that. The screen faded to black, the last note lingering like a memory that would never fully leave. The years that followed the Ridgewood concert were filled with quiet ripples of change. Students found new confidence. Teachers felt renewed purpose. The community discovered a deeper appreciation for the arts. But one person who never forgot that night was Keanu Reeves. Not because of the viral fame or the headlines, but because of what he witnessed in that auditorium, the raw courage of young musicians stepping into the unknown, guided not by certainty, but by heart. Keanu wanted to honor that moment in a way that lasted, not through publicity or grand announcements, not through media events or celebrity endorsements. He wanted something steady, something meaningful, something that reflected the spirit of the kids who had found their strength under impossible circumstances. So, He created a scholarship. It wasn't announced with cameras or press releases. His foundation reached out quietly to the school district months before the next school year began. The proposal was simple, an annual scholarship in the name of Harold Benton, the teacher who had poured everything into his students until his own body gave out. A scholarship awarded not for perfect technique or flawless performance, but for heart, for perseverance, for the courage to keep playing even when the world felt heavy. Mr. Benton was overwhelmed when he learned about it. He tried to decline the honor at first, insisting he didn't deserve such recognition. But when the foundation explained that the scholarship was meant to reflect the resilience he had inspired in his students, he accepted with tears in his eyes. The ceremony was intentionally small. Each year when the time came to select a recipient, the faculty gathered quietly to discuss the students who embodied the spirit of the scholarship. They didn't look at grades first. They didn't examine scores from competitions. They talked about character, about effort, about the way each student treated others in the music room. They talked about who played with heart. When they made their choice, the foundation arranged a short private gathering in the music room. No photographers, no lights, no announcements. Just family teachers, a few close classmates, and Mr. Benton himself standing with the student who would carry the award forward. The scholarship came with a modest stipend to help with lessons or equipment. But what made it special wasn't the money. It was the symbol that came with it, a small, silver bass pin, handcrafted in the shape of the instrument that had anchored the Ridgewood concert years earlier. Etched along the curved body were 5 words that Keanu had chosen himself. "Let the music hold you." Each recipient held the pin as if it were a rare treasure. Some cried, some tried to hide their tears. Others stood frozen in quiet disbelief, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Families hugged their children tightly. Teachers wiped their eyes discreetly. Every year the ceremony carried the same gentle warmth, the same feeling that the room was witnessing something sacred. And though Keanu never attended in person, his presence could always be felt in the pin in the scholarship and in the quiet legacy he had built without ever seeking credit. The first year's recipient was a soft-spoken sophomore named Lily Tran, a clarinetist who practiced in the school stairwells because her family's apartment was too crowded and too loud for music. She was never the strongest performer in competitions, but she was the one who stayed after rehearsal to help classmates carry chairs. She was the one who lent her reeds to beginners who forgot theirs. She was the one who showed up early, not because anyone required it, but because she believed music deserved time. When Lily received the scholarship pin, she held it against her chest like something alive. Her parents stood beside her, eyes shining with a mix of pride and disbelief. Mr. Benton told her that she represented the very best of what the program could be. She said she didn't feel like she had earned anything extraordinary. He told her that was exactly why she had. The following year, the award went to a junior percussionist who had spent months balancing school rehearsals with caring for his grandparents. The year after that, the honor went to a freshman cellist who struggled with confidence but never gave up trying. With each recipient, the tradition deepened. The ceremony remained small and intimate, always held in the same music room where the Ridgewood Orchestra had once tuned their cracked instruments, unaware that their lives were about to change. The plaque on the wall grew more meaningful too. Below the dedication that read, "For those who play with heart," a small frame was added each year with the recipient's name and a short note about what made them deserving. These notes were handwritten by Mr. Benton, each one personal, thoughtful, and full of admiration. Students often stopped in front of the wall on their way to class, studying the names and stories, imagining what it would feel like to be chosen someday. For Keanu, the scholarship was a quiet promise to the children he had once stood behind on stage. He never sought updates, but the foundation shared reports annually. He read them during late nights on film sets or in hotel rooms between meetings. Sometimes he paused and smiled at the handwritten stories about effort and perseverance. Sometimes he felt his chest grow tight with emotion, remembering the way the kids had looked at him that night, scared at first, then brave, then unstoppable. There were moments when he wondered what would have happened if he hadn't stepped in, if the students had walked off stage that night, if the concert had been canceled, if the world had never witnessed their courage. Those thoughts never lingered long. What mattered wasn't the hypothetical path, but the one they had walked together. The scholarship fund became a symbol far beyond Ridgewood High. Other schools wrote letters asking how they could start programs of their own. Music teachers sent messages describing how the story inspired them to keep going during difficult times. Families told the school that the award reminded them that kindness could ripple across years. And through it all, the silver bass pin remained unchanged. Simple, weighty, eternal. A reminder that music doesn't leave you the moment the stage lights dim. It holds you, shapes you, reminds you who you were on the night you chose to be brave. The Ridgewood students carried that reminder into every corner of their lives, knowing it had begun with a single, unexpected moment and a man who believed in the quiet power of a song. Long after the ceremony ended and the families made their way home, the Ridgewood Auditorium settled into a peaceful stillness. The lights had dimmed to a soft glow, leaving only the faint illumination above the stage. Programs were scattered on seats. A few folding chairs sat slightly askew. It looked exactly like any other high school auditorium after a long night, yet something different hung in the air. A quiet weight, a sense of gratitude, a memory that refused to fade. Keanu stepped through the side door slowly, almost hesitant, as if entering a sacred space. He had slipped away from the scholarship gathering early, not because he didn't cherish it, but because he wanted a few moments alone in the place where everything had started. He walked down the aisle between the rows of worn seats, brushing his hand along the back of one chair as he passed. The fabric was rough, the metal cold, but he could almost feel the warmth of the people who had sat there months earlier, breathless and teary as the students played. He reached the stage steps and paused for a moment before climbing them. The boards beneath his feet creaked softly, a familiar sound he had heard countless times over the years on sets and stages. But this creak felt different, more personal, more honest. When he reached the center of the stage, he stopped and took a long, slow breath. The hall felt enormous in its silence. Without the students tuning, without the parents whispering, without the paramedics rushing, or the audience reacting, the room felt like it belonged to another world entirely. A quiet world, a peaceful one, the kind of world that gives people space to understand what moments truly mean. Off to the right, leaning against the back curtain, the old school bass rested exactly where it had been placed earlier that evening. Its finish was scratched, its strings were mismatched, the tuning pegs were worn to a dull bronze, but to Keanu it looked like something beautiful, something that had carried more than notes, something that had carried a moment when fear transformed into courage. He walked toward it slowly. When he reached the instrument, he placed one hand gently on its shoulder, the way someone might greet an old friend. The wood was cool under his palm, the same bass that had helped steady his voice, the same bass that had given those kids a chance to find their strength, the same bass that had held the entire auditorium in a moment of shared silence before the first note rose into the air. Keanu smiled small and thoughtful. Not the smile of a celebrity, not the smile of someone being filmed, just a quiet smile of a man remembering what mattered. He wasn't thinking about the news reports or the viral videos or the millions of people who had reacted online. He was thinking about Maya tightening her bow with trembling hands before she played, about Carlos imagining his father hearing him for the first time, about Erin finding strength in her fingers when she thought she had none left, about Dante holding himself still, choosing discipline over fear. He stayed there for a long moment, taking in the empty hall, letting the quiet settle around him, like a closing chapter he wasn't quite ready to finish. Keanu finally stepped back from the bass and walked toward the center of the stage again. He stood where the conductor's stand had once been, staring out at the rows of empty seats. It wasn't difficult to imagine the faces that had filled those chairs. He could still picture the mother in the back row, holding her hands to her mouth. He could still see the father slipping into the aisle so he could record without blocking anyone's view. He could still hear the shaky breathing of the students as they played the first notes of Hallelujah. These memories didn't fade. They settled deeper with each passing day. He closed his eyes, letting the silence guide him to the truth he had felt that night. It wasn't fame that carried the moment. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't a grand performance. It was something smaller, quieter, more powerful than applause or news headlines. It was the way the kids looked at one another when they realized they could still play. It was the way fear slowly loosened its grip on them as the melody took over. It was the reminder that music wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. When he opened his eyes again, the auditorium felt even more spacious, almost as if it was holding the memory right beside him. He knew the world would move on. Viral videos rise and fall, news cycles shift, people forget. But the ones who were there, the ones who felt that night in their bones, they would carry it for the rest of their lives. Those students would grow older. They would face hardships. They would question themselves. But somewhere in their hearts, a small voice would always whisper that they had stood on a stage once and found courage when they needed it most. Keanu took one last look around, then walked toward the edge of the stage. Before stepping down, he paused. The quiet felt complete now. It felt right. He whispered softly, more to the room than to himself, that the loudest moments in life are often the quietest. A song, a gesture, a shared silence. Then he turned and made his way out of the hall, leaving the stage just as peaceful as he had found it. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. He walked across the empty courtyard, hands tucked in his pockets, the stars faintly visible above the streetlights. He knew his part in the story was small. He didn't stay for interviews. He didn't seek attention. All he did was fill the silence so the students could find their voice again. That was enough, more than enough. Before he reached the parking lot, he felt a sense of gratitude rise in his chest. Music had healed him once when he was young. Now he had watched it heal an entire room. And now the story turns to you. Have you ever experienced a moment where music healed something inside you? Share it in the comments. Your stories matter. And tell us what powerful Keanu moments you want to see next. We read every one.